Regulars to this channel will know that I started listening to records much later than most. In fact, it was only 4 years ago. Wow, that time has flown by. And I did it because as a very experienced digital audiophile, it's very hard to get them. And I wanted to have new music listening experiences, and everything vinyl is new to me. So there's been a huge learning curve and it's been really exciting. And I've documented my whole journey for you here. And in this video, I have some very cool new things to speak to you about as my next step. This video is my tale of 2 turntables and 3 cartridges in a way, because I've lived with the same turntable setup for the last 2 years, and it's been the best thing I could have ever done for building confidence, for building experience, and for building a love of listening to records. However, I felt like I was ready for the next step. I was excited for what was going to give me or continue to give me those new listening experiences. And I have here as my new reference an amazing turntable setup, the Pure Fidelity Symphony with the audio Origami PU8 tonearm with an Ortofon Windfield Ti moving coil cartridge. And this is a super high-end record playing setup that I am in awe of from an aesthetic and technical perspective. But I did have one big question. Could it be just all bling, and would it sound any better than the turntable setup I've been using, like I said, for the last 2 years? And let me just clarify, this video is not going to be a full comprehensive review of this new setup because it's not been here long enough, but I can give you, of course, my first listening impressions. But because this is a new reference product for me, it's going to feature in all of my videos. And I know people are going to ask me about it, so if anybody wants to know why I'm using this turntable or what it is, this is the video that has all of the information. And I think we all know what a turntable does by now. However, I think there are 3 very different but important aspects to them. Of course, we have the technicals that dictate sound quality, but then we have the practicals. What is it like to set up, maintain, and live with day to day? And third, I think is equally important as the other 2 combined, the aesthetics, because this is a big piece of furniture that we have in our homes and we have to love how it looks. And I have always loved the visual aspect of playing records and turntables because it's pretty much the only hi-fi thing that's not stationary and therefore not boring. And I like how I can put that on camera. And it amazes me how many different ways there are to essentially do the exact same thing, but how each unique turntable has its own visual style. That always impresses me. But I think for aesthetics and visual style, this new setup scores top marks. The Symphony turntable I have here is the only one in the world with a Bubinga wood veneer finish and a satin top coat, because that is how I roll. And in the flesh, it is absolutely gorgeous and stops you in your tracks to admire it. And I say that without any typical YouTuber influencer over exaggeration, because I've shown it to a number of different people and they all say the same thing. They've never seen a turntable like it before, and I've never seen one like it either. And I think it's beautiful actually, because it's got such a lovely style with such an extravagant design, but it's not over the top. And I think it perfectly manages to blend a traditional element with a modern twist. And that is definitely helped by the striking look of the PU8 tonearm, where in the flesh, the stainless steel, carbon fibre and aluminium all blends together particularly lovely on the eye. But that is enough of me gushing over the visuals. What about the technicals? And I thought the best way to show a lot of this will be to try and capture the installation process. And on that, I have to extend a huge thank you to the team from Audio Origami, because those guys drove over 14 hours to come and set this turntable up for me. So I can't thank them enough for that very extreme endeavor. And just like with music, it all starts with the bass. Sorry, I mean an over 1 inch thick, 10+ kilogram heavy aircraft grade aluminium bass that has 4 custom made isoacoustics Gaia feet built into it, so excellent isolation, and they allow for leveling adjustment too. Then on the top of that sits the 75mm plinth, so a very thick plinth made from Ultra MDF, which sounds like a marketing phrase, but PFs say Ultra is a higher density of MDF. I assume that's better for resonance control with superior fibers that they say helps with their machining quality. And one thing that I thought was super cool to see is that John Stratton, who is the owner of Pure Fidelity, has signed the underneath of the plinth. And that just shows, or it hints to, the fact that Pure Fidelity are an artisanal company. I'm not sure how you say it, but what I'm trying to say is they build or hand build all the products themselves in Canada. So this is not a mass manufactured product somewhere maybe in the Far East. And you can kind of see that in little places with the build of it. And I think that just adds an extra, maybe an extra level of charm to things. And before they applied oil to the bronze shaft, I wanted to have a look at the ruby bearing. And PF say they use a ruby bearing as it's the second hardest material to diamond, so has a higher strength and low coefficient of friction. Then after oil is applied, the massive aircraft grade aluminium and stainless steel subplatter was installed. And it's impressive to see the difference in the way it slides into the shaft after the oil was applied. And that just shows how tight the manufacturing tolerances are here. 2 round belts are used, and I was told using 2 will even out the shortcomings of 1. And there is a stainless steel pulley. Next was the installation of the 60mm, or just huge, Delrin platter. And PF say they use Delrin even though it's more expensive as a material because it's naturally a non-resonant material that has a lot of similar traits to vinyl records. They say it has enough mass for speed stability, but they believe it just sounds best. And you don't need to use any type of platter mat here, but you can do if you want to. Next was the installation of the Audio Origami PU8 12-inch tone arm via a stainless steel arm board. And also installed was the Audio Origami Core 1 tone arm cable that has a particularly lovely design. Yes, it uses cryogenically treated OCC copper conductors with an FEP insulation, and that is really nice. But what stood out to me was the really nice WBT pure copper connectors that unfortunately I didn't get on camera, but trust me, they're lovely. And the cable is handmade in the UK. And the PU8 is also handmade in the UK, with all of its parts being sourced from suppliers in Scotland, I believe. And it is a thing of beauty, that is for sure, but it's very hard to fully appreciate all of the attentions to detail just by looking at it because it's quite minimalist. I was told that is on purpose. One detail I did like is how the tone arm cable locks into the PU8 and then the cable is hidden inside the Symphony and exits underneath. That just makes for a very neat installation. Also very neat is the anti-skate mechanism that I just really liked seeing moving, even though it's super simple, and that extends to the arm tube rest that just feels really nice to slide the arm into and out of. Again, I can't explain why, it just feels nice to use. I think it's reassuringly solid, maybe that is what it is. And some might question why 12 inches are not the more common 9 inches, and there is a mum joke in there for sure, but we'll keep it serious. And this was the first question I asked AO, and they told me the longer the arm, the shallower the arc of travel across the record. So it's closer to the straight line of the cut-in lathe. In practice, that should mean less tracking errors by a third, and a third better tracking means a third more dynamics, supposedly with a more relaxed presentation too. The PU8 is a gimbal-based tone arm with 4 points of contact, and I think gimbals are pretty rare tone arm mechanisms. And 4 points of contact is obviously great for stability, but it's also 4 points of resistance to movement. But AO told me they have engineered out that problem by using dry Japanese race bearings, and they feel they have a tone arm with one of the least resistances on the market. However, I can neither confirm nor deny that statement, of course. But I think it does look cool and quite different in action to what I'm used to. And the counterweight and all of the gimbal end is made from stainless steel, which looks lovely. And I also really like the counterweight design as it screws on and secures itself with an expanding O-ring. And that makes setting your VTF very quick and very precise. And being a little OCD, that precision appeals to me. The arm tube is made from a mixture of carbon fiber and aluminium with a constrained layer design. And AO say that combines optimum stiffness with damping. And I think the carbon fiber finish is just really nice for a tone arm. I love the look of that. I think it's great. Inside the arm is a bespoke technology AO call MMADS in its version 2. And this is a meta material that isolates internal vibrations, but also floats the internal tone arm wiring. Next was to install the Ortofon cartridge. And AO used their own cartridge isolator that is made from Delrin. Again, the use of that material for its non-resonant properties. And the cartridge setup was one of the things I was worried most about. I knew there was no point having a cartridge at the quality level of the Windfield if it was not set up to its best. But something visually different I noticed about the PU8 is the use of thumb screws for securing the cartridge. And I thought that was just to add maybe a little something extra visually, but AO told me it's actually to make the cartridge installation and adjustment easier. But I think it's doing both. So as you can see, there's like a huge amount of information and details here about the turntable and the tone arm, and that is not even everything. But that's why I've made the video now, why it's all still fresh in my mind. And lastly to speak about is the Ortofon Windfield Ti moving coil cartridge that is said to have the world's finest diamond, the Replicant 100. And Ortofon used this same stylus in all of their exclusive top tier cartridges, I believe, so clearly it's a good one. And two things stand out to me about it. Firstly was how clearly I could see the diamond shape just using my macro camera lens. And that does show with a higher price, you do get more diamond, the same as your wife. Although some would argue this diamond is more important to long-term happiness. And the second thing that stood out to me is that this diamond seems to clean itself as it plays. And maybe it was just the better setup of it, but I've done video like this of other cartridges and there always seems to be some build-up of record gunk that you can see under this level of magnification. Of course, you don't see it with your eyes. However, here, the Replica 100 seems to brush it all off like Jonah Lomu did to the England rugby team back in '95. And any New Zealanders watching this will enjoy that reference, I'm sure. But there is one very important technical thing about the Windfield that probably is what makes it special, but it's also what makes it, I think, more difficult for the user. And that is its very tiny 0.2 millivolt signal output. So as a generator, it's creating an even tinier signal than most other moving coil cartridges. And I have a bit of an in-joke where I say, the more money you spend with hi-fi, sometimes it seems like the less that you get. And you could say that that is true here because that signal it generates is tiny. So that means the phono stage that you use with this cartridge, I think is going to be super critically important, and its gain and its kind of gain with its quality of signal is going to be super important and probably very expensive. And the reason I'm saying all this is because the phono stage that I have, which is the Modrite PH9XT, I don't think is the exact right, well, I know for a fact it's not the exact right phono stage for this cartridge. And I want you to keep that in mind when I speak about my first impressions and the sound quality here overall. But even so, the first thing that stood out to me is the fact that I have listened to more records in the last few days than the last few months. And yes, of course, this is my new toy and also my video project for the week, and I have needed to run it in. But I've also just wanted to keep going. I've wanted to keep listening to more and more records. So that is very telling to me that I've been liking a lot of what I've been hearing. One thing I've noticed is the soundstage from this setup and the way it's been developing. A 3D layered clear soundstage in my room has been better, quite a bit better, or significantly better, whatever word you want to use, from the records that I own. So clarity of layering, soundstage 3-dimensionality, the way sound goes back behind the speakers and then right out to you, sometimes at listening position, all of that has been better than I am used to. And you're seeing all B-roll clips with me using my esoteric amplifier in the system, but I've also listened with the Musical Fidelity Nuth Vista 600.2 integrated. And that amplifier does a sense of back behind the speakers better than the esoteric in some ways. So overall, there has definitely been a nice soundstage improvement with this new turntable setup. And the dynamics of the music has been different too. Yes, I've been getting a more well-defined, more controlled bass. That has been an improvement, but that's not really what stood out to me. What stood out to me is like the mid-range and high frequency dynamics, the way they can attack you without harshness has been improved and better. And sometimes obviously there's harshness, but the way, I think it's the speed really, the speed at which the mid-range and high frequencies can kind of deliver those transients has definitely been kind of different again and improved from the records that I own compared to what I'm used to. And better dynamics in the mids and highs, I think, gives instruments or sound effects, depending on what the music is, more vitality. And I've also noticed what I think is a quieter general background. So records have just been breezing by and I'm less thinking about the turntable and what that is doing, and I'm more focused on what is happening in the music. And that is such a cliche, I know that, but it's very true here. And now I don't want to BS you by saying that everything now sounds absolutely perfect with every record, because of course it doesn't. And that's actually been very reaffirming to me in a weird kind of way, because it shows that, well, a few things, but it shows some of the negatives that I've been hearing in some records. It's probably just the records themselves and their pressing and not my setup of the turntables. So that's been a little bit of a, pat myself on the back kind of experience. But it also just shows to me that, record pressing is what it is, and the best turntable in the world and the best cartridge in the world is not going to fix that. So that's not really where we see like the improvements or the changes and differences from one turntable setup to the other. And this was one of the things that worried me actually about a better turntable setup, would be that all of the record negatives that I've been hearing, they might become more obvious and more invasive through there being more overall clarity. But it really doesn't work like that, or it doesn't come across like that. In fact, some of the records I thought that were pretty average sounding to me, such as my copy of Melody Gardot's My One and Only Thrill, which is just a standard Amazon purchase, this record actually sounds pretty good now on the new setup. Yeah, it's not my best demo worthy record, but it sounds much better than I was expecting. And there has been some other things that have been stand out good about this system, but I'm like very aware that this is almost like day one for me. It's not day one, but that's how it feels in terms of experience, like the very beginning of this new journey with a new set of equipment, right? So I'm just moderating my kind of comments here just for now. And that's because I still need to, or want to, tweak a few things to find the exact sound that I'm looking for from this system, because I can hear its potential. And I'm focusing most of that on the phono stage, because the Windfield with its 0.2 millivolt output, I think wants a phono stage probably with around 70 or maybe more decibels worth of gain. And when I think about that, or you look at that, I think that works out to about 3,500 times of amplification, which is mental to even think about. So in terms of the quality of that amplification, so important, because even the tiniest of like error at the beginning of that or during that, it's going to get amplified so much. So the phono stages I'm looking at are probably going to be expensive, but however, it justifies itself when you think about the job, the important job that they're doing. So I want to try and get a few different ones here and make some videos about that. I've got my eye on a couple, but if you can recommend, or if you're a manufacturer of very high quality phono stages you think would be good for the Windfield, please get in touch with me. And before I speak about my direct comparison between the new turntable setup and the Origin Live setup that I've been using, I want to wind back the clock a little and speak about two different cartridges that I've used in the last 2 years to give them both a mini review. And I have spent a lot of time with the Sumiko Starling moving coil cartridge, which is a high-end cartridge that costs about £2,000, and it uses a nude micro ridge stylus with a boron cantilever. And probably most interesting to me is it has an open design where you can see the inner workings more than you can with other cartridges. And I found the Starling fairly easy to set up. However, I did struggle a little with its very highest frequencies. I found they could be a little excitable at times. However, after I spent some time adjusting the VTA, I found a happy medium or balance for the highs, vocals and bass. And in general, I would say this is a cartridge that has a clean and neutral type of sound, with the exception of the slightly exuberant highs, but that gives this cartridge a fast and upbeat, cleaner, clearer overall character, with a fast, punchy bass. So it's good for modern music and likely classical too. And I found it a very enjoyable cartridge to listen to in the main. It's just like a nice, clean, clear overall delivery. But I did find myself looking at other cartridges that have a wooden kind of surroundings, because I wondered if the wood was there to add some character or add some charm to the music, because I found myself maybe lusting after a bit more of that, which is what it's like as an audiophile when you know the sound you're looking for, but you're just not quite there. I'm sure everybody's experienced that. And more recently, I've been listening to the Pure Fidelity Stratos moving coil cartridge that costs about the same, £1,895. And it uses a micro elliptical diamond stylus with a solid aluminium cantilever. But different, it has a more enclosed body made from what they call duralumin, which is a mixture of aluminium, copper and magnesium. And they sent it to me because they thought it would be a cartridge I would enjoy from a general sound point of view, and they was right. And where it differs from the Sumiko is that it's a warmer, richer sounding cartridge. So it is more play it safe in the high frequencies and more full in the mid bass. So there is a more obvious, richer tonality to all music. Now that does come at the expense of some soundstage space and openness. However, that to me is a small trade-off that I'm more than happy to make, as I prefer music to sound warmer, richer and more full, especially in the bass, because I find that more pleasing. And I think this would be a great cartridge for vocals, jazz music and electronic as well. One thing I noticed about the Stratos was that it seemed to be a little bit more fussy with record noise than the Sumiko did. The Sumiko seemed to maybe just push that back a little bit, whereas the Stratos made me aware of it. But you have to factor in, these have both been cartridges set up by me, and I'm definitely not an expert in this area. But I'm hoping that my general findings can maybe just help you if you're considering cartridges around this price, to help you understand some of the differences. And while we're talking about comparisons, I listened to both turntable setups I have here this week through the same hi-fi system to see what differences there might or might not be. And I even used the same Axis One record isolator on both to keep that consistent. And do take into account there is a very big price difference here. The Origin Live turntable on ARM with the Stratos cartridge comes in at around £9,000, so a lot of money. The Pure Fidelity Symphony, the Audio Origami PU8 tonearm and the Ortofon cartridge comes in around £22,000. But that also creates the hi-fi phenomenon of the rule of doubles. So I was expecting a very significant difference in the sound quality. And of course, this is not an exact apples for apples comparison, nowhere near it in fact. So just take my comments on the differences of sound quality for what they are and nothing more. It was no surprise to me that even after a week of listening to the new, much more expensive turntable setup, the Origin Live still sounded fantastic to me. I really like this turntable and the Strata cartridge for sounding, as I said before, very tonally full and rich with a full and solid bass, because that is my kind of preferred sound overall. And of course, I set that turntable up to please me as much as possible, and it still sounded very good to me. And at first, I actually thought I preferred the sound of the Origin Live setup. And that is because it actually has a few distinct advantages in this A/B comparison. But even so, it only took me a couple of songs to start to hear its limitations to what I've now become or had become more accustomed to with the new turntable setup. In all of the same ways that I spoke to you about before. The new setup gave me a more 3D developed soundstage in the room with more clarity to each instrument and the space between them. And there is also a nicer flow to the music. And I see that as being timing related, which of course is a digital audio thing. So maybe it's just better tracking and there was more going on from a soundstage height point of view or in the high frequencies in general. And that adds to that sense of improved dynamic range I spoke about before. And the new setup is just quicker sounding and it's more neutral. Whereas the similar character of the Origin Live setup was present for all music, and sometimes that really benefits it and other times less so. And maybe some of the differences I was hearing was just in my limited skill set of setting up the Origin Live, but it did have, as I said, some distinct advantages, such as the 0.5 millivolt output of the Stratos cartridge being about perfect for my Modrite PH9 phono stage, which has a 64 dB of gain. So actually, I found the knock-on effect of having not enough gain for a cartridge in the phono stage really, well, it means you have to turn the volume up very loud, but there's like knock-on effects. So the Origin Live setup had that big distinct advantage, but I still preferred and thought the new turntable setup, the Pure Fidelity and Audio Origami, still sounded better. And like I said, it's still day one for me. I know there's much more to be had from that setup. So look, that has been very telling and justifies in its own way, I think, the higher price. And you can make your mind up if you think the difference in aesthetics justifies some of the price difference too, because stuff like that is 100% personal. And there are some practicality differences too. I think the everything hidden away approach makes a turntable much easier to clean. The Origin Live setup has a lot of nooks and crannies that are tricky to clean without knocking the falling weight side bias off, for example. But look, these are all minor things in practice, but these are a few little areas where I think the new setup will be a little nicer to live with. With one exception, I actually think the Origin Live tone arm adjustment for VTA, it's got like a clock face that you can rotate clockwise and anti-clockwise to raise and lower the tone arm, is great for a novice user because you can see exactly how much you've raised it, and if you don't like the sound, you can put it back to exactly how it was before. So that fills you with confidence adjusting the VTA that you can always set it back if you don't like what you've done. That's been massive for me, and I really have appreciated that one thing about the Origin Live setup, probably more than the rest of it. But look, I don't want to run that setup down. It's been here 2 years. It's been great. I've really loved living with it. It's been absolutely brilliant. Like I said, it's been the best thing I could have done for building confidence and experience listening to records. But I'm also now still very excited by the prospect of what the new turntable setup can offer me. And I think that is a great way to close out this video. And I'm actually going to close it out with a request, because one thing I definitely need to do is to still build up my record collection. And look, I would rather have 100 records that I love and want to listen to than 1,000 that I don't want to listen to. So on that, I'm going to ask you for a recommendation. And regulars to the channel will know that I generally like uplifting, quite upbeat music, generally with a vibe and great bass if possible. So I was going to ask, can you recommend just one really good record that you think would be worth me adding to my collection? But just one, please. I can't, you know what I mean? The records are expensive. I don't want to get swamped. Recommend just one. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've found it useful and helpful in some way. And if you did enjoy it, smash the thumbs up button. And of course, subscribe to see more of my vinyl journey, phono stage reviews, and yeah, more stuff coming soon.